everyone. Hope we're not going into food coma. I know we've just had lunch, so hopefully I will keep you engaged and active over the next couple of minutes. But just a real quick briefer. Again, I'm Stephen Glover. I'm our Director of Membership, so essentially an employee of SAF. I hate to use the term national because I don't like things that divide us. I think we're one continuum of national, state, division, chapter. But essentially an employee of SAF. Started in October this year, like October 15th to be accurate, and so I'm very new to the forestry world. I have a lot to learn about this industry, but what I do have is a lot of background in membership. I've done membership work now for almost 12 years, and as we've had a lot of conversation about today, a lot of what you're hearing in this training session is about human nature and certain things and actions that we do to get us from where we are now to where we perhaps want to be at some point in the future. So today we're going to focus on membership, but the question is, why do members really join an association? So I'm going to force this to be an interactive session. I'd like each of you to pull out your driver's license. And if you don't have one like it, then just pretend you have it. But if you do have it, pull it out, because it does make a visual. So, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you see your driver's license?
Bad picture. Unflattering photograph.
Unflattering photograph. Anybody else?
Big brother.
Big brother, okay. What does this represent to you? Or maybe I should ask the question, when you first got it, what did it mean?
Freedom.
Okay. Now, membership's a lot like a driver's license. Because you can put it away now. You've gotten over the excitement of getting your driver's license, and you just put it back in your wallet, you stick it back in your pocket or your purse, and you're good to go, and you forget about it, right? But what does that license do for you? It means that at first when you're a kid, it's free. But then fast forward, you maybe get married. And either you get pregnant or your wife gets pregnant, and what do you know? You have to take her to the hospital. Without that, you don't get to the hospital. Or you have an ailing parent. They need to go to the emergency room, and you're too far out. Ambulance isn't going to come where you are. That is your ticket to what you need to do. Now let's go to the other end of the life spectrum, and now you're fortunate enough you're 90 years old or in your 90s, and you've had a stroke. And the DMV tells you they're going to take away your driver's license. So it's the opposite end of that 16 or 18-year-old getting their license for the first time. You lose it. And so the reason I use the driver's license as an example with membership is because a lot of times membership in organizations, people are excited at the time that they join an organization, then they put it away and they forget about it. They don't engage with the membership, they don't go to events, they don't read any of the things that come out from the organization, they don't speak up and say, hey, it would be really helpful if you had X, in which case many times an association does have whatever that happens to be if they would just ask the question. There are plenty of people, staff or many committed volunteers that are willing to reach out and assist with that. So it's important to understand how folks will take membership for granted. And part of what we have to do as volunteers for a society and as me as a membership association professional is to make sure people understand the full spectrum of the value of what it is that they get. Now, several years ago there was a book that came out. Some of you may know Dr. Robert Cialdini. He's written on the topic of influence. And there was a book called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. And one of his points that he had made is that all decisions in life are made based on emotion. And then we rationalize those decisions later. And I've had this conversation with a million different people over the years, and I have the same reaction. That's not true. It's not true. It's like, okay, think about the car you bought. Or think about the house you bought. Why did you buy it? Because it had 4 walls and a roof on it? No. I mean, your car has 4 wheels on it. Did you buy your specific car or SUV because it has 4 wheels on it? No. There's certain reasons behind that. And so, rather than just tell you the mechanics of membership and the things that we do, it's really important that you get to the core of what drives people to make a decision on becoming a member and staying a member. And so, kind of walk through some of those. First driver would be connectedness, the need or desire to belong to something of importance. I've heard a lot of students, they say, well, the reason I joined SAF while I was in college is because I wanted to connect with people that shared similar interests and thoughts as I did. And so initially it became more of a peer group of belonging. And then as they fast forward through their career, then it was a matter of, well, I need to make some connections perhaps to help with my career. Jobs don't necessarily last forever, and so I want to have some people I know and connections where I can move on. Or it could just simply be because they wanted to be able to bounce ideas off of one another and learn from the best practicing experience. Second would be contribution, the desire to give back, to contribute something to the world. And then there's prestige, and prestige is a little deceptive. So you want to achieve recognition or status. Now we think of that as probably in the, okay, I wear an Armani suit, or I have a big house or big car, that in terms of prestige. But oftentimes prestige can be that you don't have that first job and you want to get that job. That kind of fits in with prestige. It also fits in with security, because you're going to get paid, hopefully, for doing that job. But it is part of the prestige element. Competence and confidence, appearing informed and knowledgeable. You start a new job, or you start with a new employer, and they don't really know you. It's a getting to know during the initial stage. Belonging to a professional society or an association is a great way to really build your skills to be more competent and comfortable in doing your job. And then next would be security, knowing that there's that backup. You don't have to go it alone. You've got all these, you guys are all here together. You've connected over the last couple days. You've got an additional day to go. You're now connected to one another. So if you need to reach out to one another, you can do that. There's a certain amount of security in being able to reach out to people for getting questions answered, or again, bouncing ideas. And finally, then there's power. And that kind of goes to the last conversation that we had, which was about leadership. And that's leading change to produce positive outcomes. So it's just really kind of important to understand that it's not just about, I want to get the journal for paying for my membership. There's a psychological rationale that goes behind that. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the membership life cycle. And essentially, membership runs in this continuous circuit. Ideally, you want to short circuit that cycle by keeping the member in as a member. So we start off, sorry for folks in the back, I doubt you can read it, but we're going to walk through each of these stages. First step is the prospect. Then you move on to the new or rejoining member, followed by onboarding of that member, ongoing communication, engagement, and then either they renew or they cancel. And so you can see, if I get them to renew, I'm cutting off the first 3 steps. So it's a lot easier to keep a member than it is to go out and get a new member. So let's talk about prospects. These are the people that have never been SAF members, or their previous members that are at the prospect stage. You got to keep in mind, SAF is largely an unknown to them. The biggest mistake we can make is assume that everybody's heard of SAF, they just aren't joining. Come from the other angle, that they need to be educated about what SAF is and what we do. Some may know of SAF from academic advisors, former employees, trade press, event attendants, but again, you need to gauge someone's level of understanding with the organization. And really what you're going to want to do is, when you have that pool of individuals that are prospects for membership, you're going to want to divide them based on their knowledge of SAF. Because there are going to be those that it's more of the sale element of trying to convince them on what the value would be in them either returning as a member or joining for the first time. And then there are those where you're going to go through a full educational process. What is SAF? How does it work? Then you want to consider holding informational sessions. So a lot of states, a lot of divisions have events throughout the year. They have meetings, and one of the questions would be is, do you hold an open house? Do you invite the non-members to come in and kind of put on a, for lack of a better term, a dog and pony show, where you're going to walk them through what what the organization's about, what membership's about, where there's no pressure or commitment. It just exposes them to what they would stand to gain if they became a member. And remember, previous members oftentimes are your best source of prospects because they have a history with the organization. They had made a decision to be a member at one point in time. They've been exposed to the organization. The only thing you have to be cautious on that with is to understand why they left. So if you had a member that had a really bad experience and that's what precipitated them going out, I called, I never got a response from staff, I reached out to the chapter, or I was a member for a full year and I never got anything from the division of the chapter, I didn't know anything was going on. That person may remember that, and so that can make it difficult to try and bring it back in. So whether the person's joining for the first time or returning after hiatus, they're at the new member stage of membership. And just like with us, you meet people, usually within 30 seconds you form your first opinion, your first impression of somebody that you just met. If you're like me, it's like oftentimes you try and say, oh no, you know, I need to step back, I'm being judgmental and rethink it. And again, if you're like me, more often than not, you get down the pike for somebody perhaps that wasn't a good connection, and you realize the older you get, that you shouldn't second guess your intuition in that first impression. So bottom line is that anytime you have a non-member that's attending your event, every little thing matters. That first experience, when they walk in the door, did somebody from the chapter greet them? Did they shake hands with them? Did they welcome them to the event? That will leave a strong impression. First 6 months of membership are critical. That's really where the person's going to decide whether or not this makes sense. And it's been said that a member is really not a member until they renew for the first time. Because when they first join, it's a test drive. They're looking at it, say, okay, I'm not sure, I'm going to dip my toes in the water, see if this works, and then if it does, then I'll renew. That's why first year retention is usually your first metric on how well you're doing with membership. You want to know why the person's joining in the first place. Because whatever it is, whether it's the emotional or it's the practical, whatever they're mentioning to you is important to them. You want to make sure you're delivering on that right away. And at a minimum, thank them. Thank them for being members. Just saying a word of thanks goes a long way. You don't want to take those members for granted. You can do it by phone, you can do it by email, and if you really want to take it to a personal level, you do a handwritten note. I know that's kind of out of vogue these days, so really that makes it kind of stand out even more if somebody sends you a handwritten note. And the thank you begins the onboarding stage. So, and I'll step outside of this right now. So a lot of what I'm talking about is best practices, and then I also know what SAF has done to date. So know that with me just starting the organization, we're going to be transitioning. One of the things that we're going to focus on operationally is developing the onboarding. So right now, as I understand it, when I walked in the door, is essentially a digital message went out when somebody first joined the organization, and then the next time they really got a touch, if you will, other than just general newsletters and publications, is a bill. It's time to renew. So join, we want money. And as kind of an aside with that, I've gone out and I've done town halls with members for a number of different organizations over the years, and they say the only time you call us is when you want money. And when you hear that, it's like, wow, okay? It sends a very strong message. We're not effective in communicating how much we value our members, demonstrating that we're there. I've had members tell me, I belong to other organizations that they call me throughout the year and they say, do you need anything? Just want you to know we're here for you. And so there's a lot of opportunity to be able to do that. Now, one person for an 11,000, 12,000 member organization, yeah, it's not going to be me alone. It does take a village to be able to do the outreach. And the great thing is, because of our structure, if you break it down into the states, the divisions, the chapters, it becomes completely manageable to be able to do that touch and reach out. So essentially, over the first 90 days to 6 months, you're going to have a series of periodic hits with the member, just to touch base with them and let them know. And it can be email, can be phone, can be a written letter, but don't do it as dear member. You know, use the person's first name. How do you feel when you get, you know, dear whatever delivered to you at your home? You know, you don't feel the love. essentially. And really, that's the single best step for retention, first year retention, is the onboarding. Then there's the issue of ongoing communications. We were talking with programmatics and the various committees, like the newsletters committees. It's really important to communicate. I cannot tell you again how many organizations where I've talked to members and I didn't hear anything throughout the entire year. And that's devastating, because then there's just really no connection at all. So here, members are automatically getting the e-Forester and they're getting the forestry source. So at minimum, they're getting that repeat contact of SAF communication with them. Again, doesn't replace the personalized contact, but it is at least constantly putting SAF before their eyes. You can supplement that with your newsletter. Just a quick show of hands, how many of your locals are doing newsletters of any sort? And then keep them up, are you doing them at least quarterly? Okay, a little less than, okay. So you do want to try, I think we were saying before, you want to be consistent. There needs to be a plan with communication, was what we were talking about earlier, is to make sure that no matter what you do, stick with it, because you start to build an expectation. So if you're doing it quarterly or monthly, the member's coming to expect that cycle. If you miss a month and there's no explanation for why, then you leave them kind of hanging out there. But remember, newsletters are a monologue. It's you pushing information out, it's not you getting information back. We were talking about committees and why all the committees and why is that important, because committees and working groups are dialogue. That's where the organization's going to be speaking with you and you're going to be speaking with your association, and that's where it's the back and forth to really kind of form the core of the programs and the services that we offer as an organization to you. So that dialogue is incredibly important. And it's not just at a national level, it's at all levels. So in your neighborhood, there may be a specific issue going on in that area that has nothing to do with the rest of the country, but it's exceptionally important to foresters in that area. And if you can, nice thing to do is mid-year is to do a touch base call. That's just an outreach. Again, if you have a membership committee, have your membership committee go through the list of existing members, decide who has relationships with whom. If you don't have relationships, you still divide them up. Each person makes so many calls, they reach out, they don't talk about renewal, they don't talk about dues, they just say, hey, it's so-and-so, I'm calling you from the such and such division. I just wanted to reach out and say hi. We missed you at our last meeting, or thank you for coming to the last meeting, and wanted to know if you had any questions or if there's anything you need. And oftentimes the response is silence because they've never gotten that. You know, it's like, okay, wow, okay, that's great to know. And so usually there's not a whole lot of follow-through you'll have to do, but every now and then somebody will come back and say something, or over time they'll come to understand, I can rely on my association. Engagement. An engaged member is a retained member. And engagement takes many different forms. Engagement, essentially, you've got transactional engagement, and then you've got ongoing engagement. Transactional engagement is I register for an event, I subscribe to a publication. It's a single shot, in, out, in, out. But if you can get folks involved in something like a committee or a project, you've got ongoing commitment. Now they're starting to develop an emotional connection to the organization. They're vested in the interests of the organization, and so now they're going to keep going. Those folks almost guaranteed to renew. And most of you are already sitting in the room, so. And as Ken was saying earlier, why did he step up? Because most members are willing to engage if you ask them. All you have to do is ask. I mean, ideally for leadership, you want somebody to step up. But sometimes, you know, Tom was talking about, you get to that point, does anybody want to be the next chair-elect? And it's silence in the room. And that silence can be a number of things. It can be a confidence factor where you want to step up, but you feel like you're not worthy to be that leader, in which case I'd encourage you to believe that you are worthy. But sometimes it just takes that ask. So asking to help put out boxes or put out stuff at a meeting is that first step toward getting somebody involved at a deeper level with the organization. Now, the most frequent objection you're going to run into is time and money. We're all time pressed. We've got work things going left and right, I can't get away from the office, the time for the event clashes with something I've got going on. Can't afford it, you know, the annual convention, I can't afford to be away from the office, I'm gonna have to pay for the registration and the travel and the accommodation, it's a lot of money. There are plenty of things that a member can do, and there are plenty of ways of getting involved that is respectful of their budget. So if somebody's tight, they don't necessarily have to go to the convention, and it's important that we don't shame them because they are not coming to an event. Ideally, we want them there, but we need to respect that people have their own limitations. And then finally, renewal and cancellations. So renewals when they're going to determine if there's been enough value for them to continue for the coming year. And if there isn't, they're going to drop. Mistake would be to believe that now they're a lapsed member and you're going to call them and now you're going to retain them. Really what you're doing is a collections call. At that point, that decision was made 6 months ago. So it's really that midpoint in a membership when somebody says, you know what, this is worth it, or this isn't worth it. And worse, you don't necessarily know how that membership's being paid for. Sometimes it's being self-funded, sometimes an employer's doing it as part of professional development. And if it's the latter, then you have budget planning for the employer and when they do that budget planning. And so they come walking around to your office and they say, well, are you getting anything from SAF? No, not really. Okay, well, we're going to cut that, or worse, they don't even have a conversation. They say, we've had cutbacks, we're going to have to cut the budget this year, and then it's time for you to renew, there's no money for you. So really the time to get that engagement is in that first 6 months of membership, not just the first year, but each subsequent year. Because by the time you're up for renewal, the decision's been made. Thing to remember is every time a member renews, they're sending a thumbs up to the organization. They're saying, I believe in this, this makes sense for me, and I want to be here. And that's why I say again, we want to make sure we never take that for granted. If they do, unfortunately, make the decision to drop out, you want to try and understand why they're leaving. You'll hear all kinds of things, and we're moving forward, we're going to provide some resources on addressing the common renewal situations and the objections to renewal. In any sales situation, you've got 4 principal objections, and membership is definitely a sale. It's like anything else. No money, no need, no time, and no trust. The worst of those is no trust. So hopefully we don't have too many members that are leaving because there's a trust issue with the organization. Trust is I was counting on you to come battle this local fight that was going on, and you didn't help me out. You weren't even interested in it, and now I feel like you've left me hanging out in left field. That's the absolute worst, but typical ones you'll hear here will be no money and no time. And so the key is to identify that objection or a series of objections and how to counter them, because again, that's members are the lifeblood for the organization. If we don't have members, we don't exist. So it's key to keep them in here. And really, the thing to understand is that it's as important it's as important how it ends as how it begins. So if somebody makes the decision they're not going to renew, you want to try and understand the reason for the decision, thank them for their time, and respect that decision, because you don't want, again, to create a negative ending impression where the next time somebody tries to call them a year from now or 2 years from now to get them to come back, they go, yeah, I remember what they said to me when I dropped out the last time. I don't want to be a part of this organization. So do remember how it ends is